Death Club.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Danny here, and today I'm talking to you about Blade of the Phantom Master. So Blade of the Phantom Master, or Shin, Angyo, Onshi, is part of the Super String series. That's the thing over there at YLab that we've been talking about, and this is next on the timeline. Started in 2001, ended in 2007, published in Sunday Gene X magazine. That is where Black Lagoon is at, and as well as a bunch of other manga. Written by Iwan Yoon and drawn by Kyung-il Yang. And before even reading this, I was already getting confused about what was going on, right? As we mentioned, the Superstring series is a bunch of webtoons, manhwas, if you will, all connecting to each other at a certain point in the future. When I was looking up the translations to read this, it kept bringing up the series that I read, but it took me a while to think, like, is this the right one? You know, because there was more than one option to pick from. If you go to the YLab website itself, luckily there's an English version for it. It'll have the little bio section that'll go through all the characters in these various series. And so I was trying to find the ones that were in this series, Blade of the Phantom Master. Sure enough, I found them, and looking at the characters side by side, I was thinking, yeah, that does match what this character looks like. There's something off about it. The designs are different. I'm like, well, maybe that's just because it's an upgrade for the outfit later down the line or whatever. And I said, okay, cool. So we'll just read it anyways. And if this isn't it, we'll find the other version. And sure enough, it is. And to my surprise, it is a manga. That is why it's here in Sunday Gene X with other manga series like Black Lagoon. So that was an interesting discovery about this series. This isn't foreign in any way. I mean, if you look at Freezing, that is also a manga written by Koreans, published in Japan. I believe this was as well. So let's go ahead and get into this, man. It starts off with our main character, Munsu, who is later to be revealed as an Angyo Onshi, and this is a special faction of the military, and their mission is to go across the country, go to specific villages and towns, whatever you want to call them, and disguise yourself as a traveler and just kind of get a look at what's going on. Let's get the scope of what the leaders of this area is doing. Are they abusing their power, or are they doing everything that they're supposed to be doing? And, you know, if they see any wrongdoings, they come in and then they correct. And if things hit south and they're forced to fight, they are given this weapon where they could summon the souls of the fallen army of the country called Junshin, where the Angyo Onshis are from, and they use those to carry out their justice. And so Munsu here starts off as your typical lone hero, traveling by himself, going from place to place where he has nowhere to go, because at this point in his life, his home country Junshin is destroyed. There's no trace of it left. And he is probably the last Angyo Onshi that there is. And the more we get into this story, you know, we meet other characters like Chiyun Hang in the first chapter. She is rescued by him, and she had a lover that unfortunately passed away and chose to follow Munsu instead. As the manga goes, they're reluctant at first, but he agrees to have her become his sando, and that is basically a bodyguard. But because their job is to hide in plain sight, sandos have to be out of plain sight at all times until they're summoned, or they have to protect their master. And then eventually, way down the line, once things are getting more and more established, we come in with the more or less the comedic character. When things start getting serious and Munsu can no longer have his comedic tropes all the time, and his name is Bangja, but that's also his title, which is the servant, basically, for an Angyo Onshi. Eventually down the line, we meet the main protagonist, where all of Munsu's hatred is fueled towards, and that is Aji Tae. And so going into this story, going in blind, you know, as I was reading more and more chapters, seeing the situations our characters are going in, the first thing I thought of was, oh, I see, this is that lone tragic hero kind of story. You know, you got your Triguns, your Berserks, your Vinland Sagas, The ones where we have a stoic main character who's been traveling by himself, eventually meets companions, starts becoming a normal person again, right? Been able to enjoy more things that they didn't before, or start laughing or smiling more. And then, we hit some flashbacks of tragic stuff that happened in their past, betrayed by people who they trust. And then the enemy comes back in the present and they have to deal with them for their personal grudge as well for the fate of the world and all that in the sense. A lot of similarities here to Berserk, actually, more than the others. Just the way things are structured and all of that good stuff. So with that in mind, as I was reading it, I'm like, okay, so since I know the structure, let's see what Inwan does different here with our characters. And I think the thing that kind of helps is the setting that we're in. It's set in like a feudal-like era in Korea, and which is the specific section they're actually in for Korea, I believe, is the same area as Neolith Girl, and then as Terror Man as well, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know the geography that well for South Korea. So yeah, anyways, the setting here is what makes it kind of stand out a little bit more. Right off the bat on the first chapter, it's already set in a fantasy setting, but it's a very light touch in there. And we do get flashbacks as to reasons why. And the designs that we get in here for these monsters and mythical creatures are pretty cool. You could tell they're definitely distinct from what you normally see in Japanese media. So that definitely caught my eye, and I wanted to see more concept from there. And man, that's where I got more of the Berserk sense too, just because of how they look. And as well as this kind of being the hero story of a traveler, there's a lot of moments where it's like, oh, here's a situation, Munsu has to come in and deal with it. The nice little touch for the Korean fan base is the history that's involved, where he'll actually go and interact with specific moments that stand out in history. There was one where he met a prostitute and she did a certain thing against the general, and that turns out like that was actually part of the history over there, as well as him trying to help this princess come back to her senses, and then eventually she becomes the queen of that area. So there's a lot of those elements sprinkled throughout until things start hitting the fan hard. So I thought that was a nice little touch into the story, mainly because I'm a fan of history. I don't particularly study it, but when it's being involved, I always like to hear what's to tell. And by having this manga come in and do that while keeping everything still the same, adjusting it based on this fantasy setting we have, I thought was pretty cool. Strong characters throughout the series. I think Munsu is a very likable character. Again, he's very typical what you would expect from Guts, from Vash, from Thorfinn. A lot of similarities there with their characters, and just really good stuff. And the art really complements his emotions as well. And but my only downside for our main characters is Sando herself, Chun Hyang. I think her design is of the time, early 2000s. Like, it's very, I guess you could say just Tokyo pop, just what she's rocking, just a bunch of leather belts really under a cloak. And my only unfortunate part for her is that because she's a Sando, she never talked really for, I would say, probably the first half or even more of the series. But eventually, as things got more friendly with Munsu, mainly with Bangja being there, Munsu was less strict on the rules with Sando, I guess. And so that way we could get more conversations with her. But we still don't really get a whole sense of her personality or who she really is. When we first saw her in the first chapter, she was captured. So we don't have a sense of who she is, other than that she's a powerful person who has these weapons. And as she starts, starting to open up is when things start hitting the fan hard. Therefore, we don't have time to really get more deep with her character. She just has to get stronger now. And that causes things to happen later down the line until we, I guess, meet her again towards the end. So that kind of sucks. But everybody else is great. All the characters that we meet that Munsu either knew from the past or introducing new characters that will be involved in the story, they were all great. The different personalities, striking emotions. They all have their own depth to them. So that was really good stuff to go through. And especially with these chapters, this is more or less, I think, a monthly series. man, did these chapters vary in numbers for the pages. It could have been 30, 70, sometimes it was even 100 pages. So there was plenty of time to get some depth into our characters. And throughout the whole thing, the pacing was great, no real rush. Until I would say probably the end of the series, it did feel like things were moving a bit fast. But I think that's just the scale of what was happening. And yeah, I definitely felt it because when I was reading, I'm like, okay, I have 2 more chapters left. Let's see how all of this builds up. I know there's a lot of pages to these chapters, but still, 2 chapters. Let's hope they don't rush it. And I mean, for what it was, it didn't feel that rushed, but you could definitely feel like, okay, we need to pick up the pace now just to get through certain characters. Which sucks though, because some of those final fights would have been interesting to get more depth into, have some conversations in there, explore some of the characters that they were fighting. You know, there was good matchups, but we didn't get to see the end results for majority of them. And then even we get into some of the flashback stuff, we get to expand more on the lore. All of that stuff is what you expect, really good things coming in. And then it starts to get a little abstract with Ajite, the main antagonist for the series, as like his origin and what exactly he is. This writing is solid overall. It'll definitely capture you, want you to read more, and get really invested with some of these characters. And it's whenever Munsu leaves an area, like, man, I hope these characters can come back. And there are some surprise characters that come back at the end. So that was a nice touch as well. So going into the art style for this, it does kind of feel familiar with a more seinen approach, a more mature. I mean, it is seinen, but also a mature shonen at the same time. Fighting choreography is great. The designs are fantastic, like I mentioned earlier, for the monsters. The phantom soldiers, as you would for the translation, that Munsu summons, I thought their armor was a nice little touch. It really brings that ghost element into them. The fighting choreography is pretty good as well, but sometimes it can get a little messy just on the scale of what's happening in those chapters. So it's not at total fault for that. And man, just really good use of shading and highlights in here. And it's mainly for our main characters, like Munsu. He's got like this Mugen-like hairstyle where it's short and wavy, pretty thick. And just the way he draws the highlights on there, and especially when it's down, when he's not wearing his headband. And when things get serious, you know, he likes to use his lighting at the perfect moments, and it really shows. Fantastic stuff. And then even going back to like the first chapter, it's almost crazy to see how good the art got over time. It's you know, of course, one of those things like you don't even notice it changing. But yeah, as he got better in the art going through this series, the facial expressions were fantastic. It really shows you everything the character's feeling or thinking at the moment. Yeah, really great to see. Just the way the attacks are being struck, all the cloth that's being drawn, it is really great. Aesthetic choices, solid. Even the coloring too, when we get some of those for like the volume covers and all that, it has this nice little, you could tell it's a volume cover color, I guess. Like if I had to pick another series that has that, it would be Battle Angel Alita, the sequel series for that. Just the way the volume covers are colored, it's the same effect here. So yeah, overall, with the 76 chapters coming in, if you have an itch to get into a series about a tragic hero similar to the other ones I mentioned, this is definitely right up your alley. And there is a guidance book I will be checking out, going more backstories into some characters that we could touch on just a bit more. And I said, why not? We're going to check that out. That's going to come out real soon. But before we get out of here, as I was going to pick up the guidance book, I found something called Shin, Angyo, Onshi, and the art style was different on the thumbnail. I was like, oh, okay, what's going on? Upon taking a closer look, I see Sando and the outfit she's wearing specifically. And I thought, oh, that's the same outfit that's on the YLab website. What is this? So I clicked on it, and this is the reboot, essentially, for this series. The translations mark it at 2019, but it could have been sooner. Who knows? Since, you know, sadly, these don't come out in English. And there's only 3 chapters out right now, and those just cover the first half of the prologue. All it is it's not even a retelling of the story. It's just an adaptation from it being a manga to a webtoon. So what it looks like is they just grabbed the panels, chopped them up, made them fit into the scrolling webcomic style, and then they threw in some color. Now, I can't tell if it's redrawn or not because there are a lot of pages. There's a lot of panels where it looks one-to-one. I did a quick comparison between Munsu in both sections, and just seeing the way it's drawn on both manga and webtoon, it looks like it's the same exact thing, but they just cut out Munsu, slapped in a new background, and then threw in color over him. So maybe that's what they're doing. And unfortunately, I don't have any more information because there's only 3 chapters translated. And the first thing I thought was like, I guess that's cool, but if I had to pick, it's definitely gonna have to be the manga version, mainly because just the way it works out. One thing that's great about a manga is the limited use you have as far as conveying things on scene, and that has to do with the lack of color. So you have really striking shots of just black and white and some gray tones. Like I mentioned earlier, this guy knows how to do his lighting well when it's an important scene, and just thinking of how the color could affect those scenes might be a little different and won't be as impactful. It won't have that hit to it. But I could be wrong, because One Piece gets colored and there's some really strong, impactful scenes in there, and I think the color can definitely add a lot to it. I think it's also the way they color One Piece versus here, right? Like I said, here they have like that cover color. Just the way it looks is a little bit different from what I would expect it to look like if it was colored weekly. So if they ever translate more of the quote-unquote reboot for the webtoon, I will probably just skim through it and mainly just see what the structuring is like. Because, it is a manga, so that also means that there are pages where it's spread out, right, over 2 pages. So I wonder how they're gonna translate that into a webcomic, because it's all about just the panels and long strips of artwork in there. So I could see there being problems transitioning those scenes in there. And since it's being adapted as a weekly format, it'll probably be a while before it catches up to the final chapter. So that's going to wrap us up today, guys. Thanks for listening. Again, real soon, we're going to be dropping the Gaiden episode that's going to complement this. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and send us an email, unversepodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your thoughts, and of course, we could talk about it on the next episode. And you can follow us anywhere you go on social media at Unverse Podcast, and we'll let you know when the latest episodes drop. So thanks, guys, and I'll catch you on the next one.